and welcome back to another episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Haley Hayhurst, the owner of Espresso Podcast Production, a full-service podcast agency specializing in editing, marketing, and strategy. And today I have an incredible guest, Monique AJ Smith. She is a veteran athletic administrator with 30 years of experience, and she launched her consulting business, Seeds of Empowerment, full-time in March of 2013. She tells us the story of how she received a pink slip, she was fired, and she had to turn her life around and decide what she was actually going to do. And what she really wanted to do was empower women to live their best selves in sports. She wanted more female leaders. She wanted women empowerment, and that is exactly what her business is doing now. So she talks about her journey from being laid off to going full-time into consulting. She also talks about how she just said yes to new opportunities and how you can also open yourself up to new opportunities. We talk about how to get exposure, how to niche down to empower more people, which I know sounds contradictory, but you'll hear that in the bit where she talks about her podcast. And we also talk about confidence and how confidence is really a big thing that holds women back from reaching their full potential. And she also shares her Learn the Game framework, which is fantastic. I cannot wait for you to listen to this episode and let me know what you think. Definitely read the show notes to learn more about Monique and also connect with her on LinkedIn, her website, listen to her podcast. All of the links are in the show notes. And if you have questions about how to start your own podcast or start your own business and market with a podcast, I am definitely your girl for that. Reach out to me at Espresso Podcast Production. I am here to help. It is 2024, and this year I want to help 50 people launch new podcasts. I'll talk more about that on Instagram and TikTok. But if you want to start a podcast, come and connect with me because I am eager to help you get started and be successful. All right, let's get right into this episode with Monique AJ Smith. Hey, Monique, thank you so much for joining me on the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Hi, Haley.
How are you? I'm so excited to, get to know you. We connected on Facebook. We haven't really chatted before, and you're in a very interesting niche that I know a lot of people will be interested in learning more about. So if you want to get started by telling us more about yourself, your journey from employee to boss, and kind of how you got here today.
Well, I'm Monique AJ Smith. I am a leadership strategist for athletic departments, sport organizations, and individuals who wish to advance in athletic administration or sports management careers. I'm a 30-year veteran of athletic administration, but I will say 10 years ago, I received a pink slip, which ended up being a pink bow. I had been the athletic conference office executive for 13 years, and they changed leadership, and I received a pink slip. And so I was a little surprised, but I believe things are planted, seeds are planted, and then they take root. And after I got my pink slip, I began to, had to clean up my office of 13 years.
What is the pink slip?
A pink slip is I got fired. It wasn't in pink, but that's what they used to call it. It's funny, back in Flintstone age, they gave out pink slips, and that's what idea came from. But the thing that was interesting, I remember in 2003 having a retreat with a consultant, and I said, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I said, be a consultant full time, because I was already doing consultancy full time. And what would be your concern? And I said, health insurance. And so I wasn't married then, but now I'm married now. And so health insurance was there. So nothing was stopping me from fulfilling what I already had put in place, but did not realize it. So my first client became the NCAA. They brought me in as a consultant. They gave me a retainer of $3,000 a month, and I was called out to do leadership retreats.
Very cool. So being laid off or fired is always a terrible experience when it happens, but I think for a lot of people, it can propel them into doing what they've always dreamed of. And I like the term. I've heard this a bunch of like, if money wasn't a factor, like what would you be doing with your life? Because that's probably what your dream is, like all of those things. So it sounds like you were able to, once you had the opportunity, you took it. And tell us more about kind of what that process looked like when you started, doing the consulting work.
Well, and I try to tell my clients, you need to position yourself as an expert while you're at your 9 to 5. So you can do consultancy while you are working your 9 to 5, and then you have an easy transition. So I was already doing that. And that prepared me to be known at the time as a Title IX expert in how to help the institution present themselves in a better light by completing these forms correctly. And so that's how that began. And I was, my other piece of being known for is assisting other women to the seat of athletic director and other positions of plateau in athletic administration. And so I just took that on a national scale, just doing what I've always done, but just taking it to a national scale. And I will say social media allows you to do that at an exponential rate than you would not normally. But I was already doing it out using social media before, but it just took off.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I could see that being so helpful for any women who want to get into sports administration roles and totally see, there are a lot of hurdles you have to jump over just to be a woman in sports, regardless. And then being a leader as a woman in sports is a whole nother thing. I live in Seattle and there's just this bar that just opened and it's a female run sports bar. And I went and it was so cool. And on the table, they had all these cards where it was trivia of female sports players. And it was such a cool place. But I feel like that is probably one of the only in the world for.
I've got to come there.
Yes, come to Seattle. It's awesome. So my question is, having to jump over all these hurdles, what advice can you share with anyone listening who's trying to become that powerful woman or, make their name in the niche that they're in? What advice do you have for them?
Well, you're going to have to get okay with exposure because exposure equals elevation. And so, whether it's making a blog on LinkedIn, getting on podcasts, creating your own events, there's nothing wrong with telling your story, controlling your narrative, and being humble. Telling your story is not being humble. So that's the problem. People have a problem with that. And you got to tell your story. My undergrad degree was in communications. And I believe human interest stories are what gravitate people to you. And again, the way the world is now, it's too easy not to tell your story. I mean, if you don't feel comfortable writing, just do it on video. If you have some, you got ghostwriters now. You got the AI now. You can go and make a book just by talking into it. So you got to tell your story because people want to know how you got where we are. It's like you want to know how I got where I am.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interest, especially when it's a niche that is not fully explored.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that because, like you said, your industry is not fully explored yet. There's so much more that can happen in your industry, and you're kind of the trailblazer in that. And I love that. That's amazing. So tell us a little bit more about who you work with and how you work with them.
Well, it's interesting because we talked a little bit offline about my podcast. And so just out the blue, I had a publicist and she said, I have a podcast. No, she didn't call it a podcast. She called it a radio show. And because I majored in mass media, I knew this wasn't radio. So I just felt very disingenuous about this radio show. But when I embraced the word podcast, I could get with that. So 10 years ago, I was on a podcast, which was a part of a network. And he told me I had to have a Facebook group to go along with podcasts. Did I know what a Facebook group was? No, I did not. So he told me how to go and create it online. And then he had a guy make my logo, which is Chapman Garden. I call it a garden because I'm all about growth, professional development, personal development. There's not something about sports because I want you to think about growth when you think about me. So I began interviewing other African American women in athletic administration. The guy knew nothing about this field. He was like, well, that seems very narrow minded. You probably won't have. No, I said, at first, I want to interview only women athletic directors of color. And he didn't think there were many others. Now, because I've been in this business for 30 years, I started out at 22. Most of the people that I was working with were already in their 40s and 50s. So right now, I'm one of the older people who have had experience of 30 years. You know what I'm saying? So I'm now 55. And yeah, I mean, I knew a lot of people. And I said, watch and see. So it started in August. I think February is when I stopped having the top person. Then I went to the second person. But things keep changing, different ADs. And people have been looking forward to being on this podcast. It's now October. I'm booked now until August of next year, 2024.
Wow.
So,
and you were able to stay with the same target guest that you wanted?
Well, no, I mean now it started as athletic directors,
Yeah.
Then the second lieutenant's assistant
Okay,
AD.
awesome.
I've been branching out to the mental health to introduce, because the point is people are tuning in to find the career path of the individuals so they can parallel that or they can cross. Because I also have branched out to YMCAs, parks and recs, professional sports, so they can see that if you get to a wall, then therefore you can be able to see how I can take my skill sets over here. And the age range from in college to those who are thinking about consultancy. So, and my Facebook group has grown to 3,000 individuals.
Wow. That's awesome. And the fact that, that person told you that you weren't going to be able to find enough guests to have a show, that in proof in itself is the reason you needed to have the show, right? To highlight all the voices that maybe people didn't even know were out there, or women of color who wanted to become athletic directors. Maybe they didn't even see it was possible before they listened to your podcast. And so I love how empowering that is. And I always say, like, the more niche you can go, the better, because once you find the audience who loves what you're talking about, they will just eat it up. And there's an audience for everyone. And so you really just that's great, because I talk to a lot of people who are scared about starting very niche podcasts.
Oh yeah, that's the key. I mean, it's about quality and not quantity,
Totally.
And I've had many, many, many entrepreneurs say, oh, that's just too niche. And I was like, okay, you just let people talk. Just let them keep talking, because you're going to do what you want to do. Just let them talk. Don't need to argue with them. For me, because I'm telling you, the podcast becomes lead magnets to my consultancy. So if I help you get a job and you like how I helped you with your mindset, I do mindset work, then skill set work, then you're going to want to bring me in to work with your staff or your student athletes. So building a customer or a client, it should be like a one-time thing, because they continue to I'm talking about to go get them. After you get them, it becomes a continuous customer.
Yes.
You see, if you listen to what their needs are and you present that.
Absolutely. And podcasts are such a great way to nurture the audience along the way too. And just when you're putting out consistent content, they're going to, you're going to be top of mind for them. And so
yes,
that's awesome. Yeah. I talk about this all the time. So I love when my guests reinforce the things I talk about, so that's awesome. So tell us a little bit more about you just mentioned the mindset work before any of the leadership skill set stuff that you work on. Why do you focus on the mindset before leadership?
Well, it's two things. One is confidence. Okay. Many women don't go for certain situations. Even if you're talking about one of the main things, it was always the same women of color on a platform. And I knew there were many others. And so they wouldn't say, hey, look at me, or step up or be on a panel somewhere unless somebody asked them. Okay, so it's a confidence level. And number two, many people come to me after they get a pink slip and they are very bitter. And I can't put you in a different place if you don't get better, because you are always going to follow you. And honestly, advancement has a lot to do with your mindset, how you deal with a disappointment. Do you see a wall or do you see a door of opportunity? So I have got to create a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset, because you're not going to advance. And so I got to do that part. Then I can find out what areas we can work on, practice. And I use books. I use a lot of books. I said, and most of the books have some type of activity to back. I said, you got to do your homework. You got to do the work. And so either it's a confidence area, or even when you first in the business, there's a generational barrier there of how many people got into the business, and how are you going to jump all of these barriers? You follow me?
Yeah.
And so, but I keep trying to tell folks, people are embracing rookie mindset. It is not the person who's got all the skill sets that's going to be the most valuable to an organization. We're in a disruptive mindset. So if you got a new way of approaching an issue, then that is who should be leading that charge, not someone who's been there 20 years.
Yeah.
And so that's a mindset. That's a mind shift. That's a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And if you can't grasp that, then you're not going to be able to remain at where you are.
Yeah. And what role are most of your clients currently in when they come to you, when they, have these big goals?
Well, I mean, I tell you, it ranges. It ranges from a college kid who's trying to get their first job,
Yeah.
to those who have been there for a while, and thinking about their next, or have received a pink slip, or the middle management who is ready to take over in a program,
Totally.
and so, I have different levels. I have a group programming, and then I have one-on-one executive coaching.
Okay.
So that I can assist. And then I do university staff retreats or student athlete workshops. But mind you, when I do sometimes do projects, where I see, like one of my clients, she has some issues she needs to approach. But I said, but you can't use that you think. You got to create a strategic plan so you can reach back and say, it was the plan.
Yeah.
You see, and you need to have a student athlete group. Okay. So you can say the student athletes want this versus I heard, or you gotta have a structure. And sometimes I don't have time to create that structure. And because I've done this more than one time, I can set the template and go
Yeah.
watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Because I imagine having all these different stages that are coming to you as clients, there's probably a lot of different places that you have to start with them. A mindset of a student athlete is going to be different than someone who might be a little burnt out in their role and wants to transition. So it's a lot that you have to work with. But I'm curious, in your industry, do you see any really common pain points just like throughout the entire, no matter what stage they're at in their life?
Confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Again, confidence becomes the key point.
Yeah.
And then not knowing how to play the game. They always try to avoid politics, and politics is nothing but a game. And it's ironic that we're in sports, which is usually a game, that you try to avoid the outside of it. And I said, you learn the points of the game. And I created a framework. I call it learn, the game. L stands for listen. E stands for earn trust. A is for allow things to happen. It's just like playing spades. You allow people to renege, so then you can take all the books after they renege more than one time. And people can see them for what they are. It doesn't even necessarily, oh, look what they did. You don't need to be a person to point out all of the errors there. You just have to allow things to happen and allow other people to see how that's just not going to work out. And the most important one I would say is aura, which is relationships, building relationships with folks. When there's an issue, and I say issues, I'm going to say issue at hand. So sticking with spades, you got a hand, okay? Issue at hand, instead of rehashing how things went down, go build another relationship. Because relationships are like face cards. The more face cards you have, the more you can win the issue at hand. And so that builds you up. And then the last one is notice. Notice how you can actually notice when somebody's got a good hand. It's like they're about to jump out their seat, if you can study them. People who trash talk, people who just so notice those type of things. And then you can be able to figure out strategically, that's the key, strategically how to make a move. And I would say one of the things that I'm real cautious of, I believe in being authentic. And I would say being true to yourself. However, you have to be strategically authentic because you can mess yourself up.
I like those. Thank you so much for walking us through that LEARN acronym framework. I really enjoyed that. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it adds a lot of perspective to, any industry can listen to that and take a lot of, and especially relationships. That's a big part of why I have my podcast. That's a big part of entrepreneurship as a whole. Just working with people in some sort of consulting or service-based or even product-based relationships are key. You have to have relationships with multiple different people to be able to move forward in your business and evolve. I'm curious as we start to kind of wrap up. I know this might be a big question, but going from being fired at your role to starting your consulting business and getting the NCAA, which is a big client, as maybe one of your first, how did your confidence really impact that? Like, did you have to do any confidence work on yourself? I mean, I'm sure going from being fired to consulting was probably like a big shift. And I know a lot of people, especially in the layoffs that are happening in the world now, are experiencing similar hurdles.
Well, I have to give my husband some credit for that. I was really shell-shocked. And I went to a conference. I had a girlfriend who was having a conference and said, you got to come. You don't have to pay. I said, I don't want to come. I don't want to come. No, I need you to come. And on the panel was a young man. I served on a lot of NCAA committees, so I was already well known. And he came up to me and he said, well, I'm not lying. He said, put on a napkin, how much do you need a month? And I put down how much. And he said, well, we'll work this out. Because the thought was, I'll be back at the institution or something in a couple of months. And I only stayed with him, I think, from 2013 to 2015. And as a consultant for them, because they changed leadership as well. And they took their money and put it in enforcement of education. But I could still do workshops, but the schools had to pay me directly, which was fine because I could up my prices. You see what I'm saying? So things have to embrace being evolving. And so as an educator, I had to invest to learn how to become an entrepreneur. And that's the key. You have to invest. I mean, yes, you can get all this free stuff and whatnot, but you got to learn. Like, I didn't know what a lead magnet was. What's a funnel? I mean, all of that. I was like, huh? And ironically, in 2015, I began to teach sports management courses. So it was like I was teaching but learning. And it was actually the same thing I was learning as an entrepreneur, how to do a sales script, in sports marketing. I was like, oh, this is what I'm learning. So you really got to be a lifelong learner. Really got to get excited about learning instead of, like you said, looking back. You got to look forward, and you just got to get excited about the change. Because here's the point: what you may be upset about may be something that will take you to way more than you would ever imagine. And for me, the podcast piece, I didn't even know what it was, but it was because the podcast that my name becomes, I was internationally known, to be honest with you. I've been on a podcast in Nigeria and Ghana, and I was like, okay. And so, I go to conferences, and people will say, hey, are you the Chatting Garden lady? I was in New Orleans in the parking lot. Lady said, excuse me, are you Monique? And I'm like, huh? And she says, yeah, I'm supposed to meet with you tomorrow for dinner, because when I travel, I try to make sure I have connecting events. So you just cannot be, I don't want to say stuck, but you got to be with your eyes wide open, embrace the new.
Yeah, always growing like a garden. I love that.
Yes.
I love that. You really do embody the brand that you've created, which is awesome.
She got flowers on.
You do. You're a garden. I love it. So, Monique, I've loved this conversation, and I feel like it's a really good one for anyone who's having any confidence issues or is scared to start a niche business. And so I've really, really enjoyed just the tips that you've shared. I would love it if you could share 3 action steps to kind of wrap up this podcast, this episode. And so anyone who's listening can walk away and take action on whatever you want to challenge them to do today.
Well, one of the things that I didn't do, I didn't understand it. So that's why I'm going to repeat, be a lifelong learner.
Mhm.
Take this on as another class, especially for high achievers. We love to learn, and you don't know what you don't know. And so again, invest, join groups, like-minded individuals, because especially if you're changing from one gentry to another, you need to be around other people who understand. The other people may care about you, and they care about you, so they're trying to protect you. So you can't get all caught up with that. They're not supportive of me. The number 2 thing is to embrace email lists. That is where you get the cha-ching. Let's just be honest. Okay. That's the best conversion rate. People get a chance to know you from your podcast, but you need to have some kind of way to drive them to your email list, because that's where I can get the most conversion from. And I took a long time to embrace that because I didn't really understand. So the real simple thing is, if you have a podcast, you just email everybody the replay. Because a lot of people don't listen to that, but they will listen to it. It's right there in their face. They're not going to go on social media and hit the button. And number 3 is create a community. It's important to create a community. Like I said, after you gain a listener, I have another method, DCL. All right, you drive people to one of your buckets, okay? And one of your buckets is community, all right? And then you want to make them a lifelong customer.
I like that.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I love those. Those are great. Those are very actionable and also are great for moving your business forward. So thank you so much for sharing those. Monique, where can people connect with you if they want to work with you or listen to your podcast or just chat?
Well, here we go. I like to communicate on LinkedIn. I know we met on Facebook, but I like, because again, sometimes Facebook won't let you get the messages. You don't even see some. I had a girl that emailed me and I didn't see it till a whole year later.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Exactly. I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But she persisted. But LinkedIn, Monique AJ Smith. My podcast, unfortunately, when I first began, I was on a network, and the person who created the network, he passed away. So I had to download all of my first through 6 years, and I made a vault. So if you're interested in hearing any of the Women of Color in Athletic Administration, you go to 200 plus plus.expert to gain access to that, especially if you have someone that you know has a desire to be in the business. And if you have an athlete, see, here's the interesting thing. Many people don't even know all the different careers in there. And I didn't tell you this, but you can see it behind me. I do have a magazine as well.
Awesome.
It just came about because of what I told you about confidence. I kept trying to tell folks, you got to be able to put your intellectual property in a way, in a place where people can see what you're known for, your expertise. The podcast is about your career, but the magazine is about the expertise. And so I have all 6 of these on Amazon, A Significance in Athletics and Sports. And so there you have it.
Awesome. I will put all of those in the show notes, and congrats on that magazine. That really is awesome that you've been diversifying the way that you reach people so much. The podcast, the magazine, your email lists, the way you work with your clients. It's amazing. And I feel like there's a lot to learn from you. So I'm very grateful that you came on the podcast and spoke with me and my audience today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.